Dr. Evelyn Marlowe was a woman who lived for ruins, not the crumbling houses of sleepy towns, or the ruins tourists photographed on postcards, but cities. Vast, dead, abandoned cities that stretched farther than imagination allowed, sealed beneath layers of earth and history. For Evelyn, history wasn't just a story. It was a labyrinth she could walk into, touch, and decipher. She stood at the edge of the elevator shaft that descended deep into Sector 9, a newly uncovered megacity buried beneath the remains of Arc 7. On the surface, the city was a desolate expanse of sand-swept towers and cracked highways. Sunlight glared across glass dunes where wind had sculpted skyscrapers into jagged monuments. But beneath, she'd been told, lay streets frozen in time, skyscrapers intact, civilization preserved like insects in amber. Her team, a mix of graduate students, geologists, and engineers, moved with practiced efficiency. They obeyed her lead without question, though the fear in their eyes was palpable. Most had never seen a city like this, and even fewer would ever enter one. She glanced at the faces around her. Kendra, pale and wide-eyed, fiddling nervously with her scanner. Malik, silent as ever, hands buried in pockets. Tomas, energetic, almost reckless, snapping photographs at every opportunity. "Everyone ready?" Evelyn asked. Her voice echoed oddly in the elevator chamber. The answer was a chorus of anxious murmurs. Descending into Sector 9 was like stepping into another world. The air grew thick, metallic, almost alive. The elevator groaned beneath them, chains rattling like bones clattering in the wind. A faint smell of iron and decay filled the cabin. Evelyn's hand brushed the cold wall instinctively. The sensation grounded her, reminded her that she was real, that she was still herself. When the doors opened, the city revealed itself in muted grandeur. Concrete streets stretched endlessly, lined with skyscrapers that had survived centuries underground. Cars were half buried in sediment, frozen mid-motion as if their passengers had simply vanished. The streets were eerily still. Not a sound of dripping water, not a scurrying rat, only the echo of their own footsteps. "This is incredible," whispered Kendra. Evelyn smiled faintly, but her eyes were sharp, scanning. The city was perfect, too perfect. Something about the absence of decay, the absolute silence, gnawed at her. She ran her gloved hand across a wall and felt the etchings beneath the dust. Words partially obscured. "Remember US." She photographed them, the flash briefly illuminating the cavernous street. In that instant, a shadow flickered across the wall behind her. Not human, not entirely, elongated, disproportionate. She spun around. Nothing. Just the empty street. Evelyn told herself it was her imagination. Too many hours underground, too little sleep. But an itch in her mind refused to be ignored. Hours passed in the exploration of Level 1. They mapped corridors, cataloged artifacts, and took environmental samples. Everything was preserved, the signage, the kiosks, even circuits faintly humming with life. Not functioning electricity, but something else. Something that made the air pulse with a rhythm like a heartbeat. At night, in the temporary base camp set up in the elevator chamber, Evelyn reviewed footage from the day. One shot made her stomach tighten. A figure in the distance, tall, featureless, watching them. She zoomed in. It was gone. She dismissed it. Exhaustion, nerves. Yet a whisper lingered in her memory. Someone is watching. Sleep came fitfully. Evelyn dreamed of staircases spiraling downward into darkness that stretched infinitely. In the dream, she walked alone, footsteps echoing, hearing whispers in languages she didn't know. She awoke sweating, heart pounding, her flashlight beam trembling as it swept the walls. Yet the city was beautiful, beautiful in its death. Evelyn felt a thrill in the impossibility, a world untouched by time, a civilization frozen mid-step. She remembered her childhood fascination with ruins, the stories her father told her about cities that could not be forgotten. Now she had found one, but that thrill carried a shadow. Every shadow along the cracked streets seemed alive. Every flickering light in the distance felt deliberate, like the city itself breathing. The faintest hint of movement at the corner of her vision made her start. She told herself it was the light, the dust, the moss. But she knew, deep down, that the city had a consciousness. By the end of the first day, her crew was exhausted but exhilarated. They had documented streets, buildings, and artifacts. Even Malik, usually stoic, admitted under his breath that it was like stepping back in time, or forward, to something other. Evelyn lingered at the edge of a plaza, running her fingers over cracked glass that had once been a store window. Within, mannequins frozen mid-pose stared blankly, eyes chipped and hollow. She could have sworn one of them moved slightly when she blinked. Her pulse quickened. The shadows of the city pressed in. She tried to shake it off. Tomorrow, they would descend further. Lower levels promised more mysteries, more untouched streets. She wanted to be brave. She wanted to be rational. But as she drifted to sleep in the cramped base camp, the whisper returned, soft and sibilant. Remember us, remember us. And this time, it felt almost like a promise. This chapter introduces Evelyn, establishes the eerie, abandoned megacity, and plants the first seeds of unease, strange shadows, whispers, and the city's unnatural preservation, while keeping the story grounded in her perspective as an archaeologist. The following morning, Evelyn awoke with a headache that seemed to pulse and sync with the city itself. The echoing whispers from the previous night lingered at the edges of her mind. She shook them off, convincing herself that it was fatigue, a mind fraying at the edges from too much darkness, too much silence. The team had descended further into Sector 9B, a lower district sealed behind polymer doors that had resisted time itself. Sensors indicated normal air pressure and oxygen, an impossibility for a city buried for centuries. Evelyn's instincts told her that the laws of the modern world had little authority down here. Malik frowned at her instructions. "Doctor, these readings don't make sense. The pressure levels, the air composition, something's off. We shouldn't go any deeper." Evelyn met his gaze, calm and firm. "That's exactly why we have to. We came for discovery, not comfort." The doors groaned and gave way after much effort. Beyond was a street bathed in a soft, unnatural light. Panels embedded in the pavement flickered faintly, emitting a greenish glow that reflected in pools of stagnant water along the cracked roads. The architecture was different here. Walls curved like vertebrae, staircases spiraled impossibly, and signage had no recognizable language, only spirals, triangles, and symbols that felt almost organic, as though the city itself had grown them. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She walked slowly, examining the symbols, running her fingers over the walls. The surface was warm, surprisingly so, pulsing slightly beneath her touch. It was as if the city was alive, feeling her presence. Kendra moved hesitantly beside her, whispering, Do you feel that? Like the walls are watching." Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't want to admit that she felt it too. Something within her mind was stirring, a resonance that matched the city's rhythm. The further they advanced, the more the faint humming grew low, almost imperceptible at first, but insistent. It pressed against her skull, like a heartbeat she couldn't escape. By midday, the crew had begun noticing odd occurrences. Their devices behaved strangely. Cameras recorded images that weren't there, sensors picked up movement in empty corridors, and radios emitted static that resolved into faint whispers, sometimes her own voice calling out her name. At first, Evelyn tried to rationalize. Drafting scientific reports, she told herself that it was interference, fatigue, the echo of their own voices. But the shadows moved unnaturally, stretching and contracting, sometimes aligning into vaguely humanoid forms. In the periphery, she thought she saw shapes observing them, retreating when she looked directly. That night, Evelyn sat alone reviewing her footage. Her flashlight flickered over walls, revealing faint graffiti etched beneath layers of dust. She paused at one marking, a spiral enclosing a silhouette. Her breath caught. She recognized the outline. It was her own silhouette. The whispers returned in her head. This time, not gentle, not distant. "You shouldn't have come, but you did." She recoiled. Was the city speaking to her? Or was her mind breaking under pressure, isolation, and obsession? By the fifth day, the unease became undeniable. Tomas, who had been brimming with energy and curiosity, vanished. One moment he was adjusting his scanner. The next he was gone. His tracker flickered once from level 4, then went silent. The team searched tirelessly, but the corridors seemed to twist, disorienting them. Walls shifted when unobserved. Hallways extended beyond logical length. The city was no longer merely a ruin. It was a labyrinth, and it seemed to resist their presence. When Malik confronted her, his voice trembling with fear, he said, "Doctor, this place, it's not just abandoned. It's alive, and it doesn't like being disturbed." Evelyn wanted to argue, to rationalize, but deep down, she knew he was right. Something ancient had survived here, something that watched, remembered, and perhaps judged. That night, she dreamed again. Endless staircases spiraled downward, but now the shadows took form. Faces appeared in the walls, staring at her with hollow eyes. The whispers were louder, forming words she could almost understand. "Join us, remember, belong." She woke to find her audio recorder still running. When she played it back, it had captured faint murmurs, Tomas' voice among them. He was calling her name, pleading, then laughing, then silent. The city had taken him, or perhaps he had become part of it. Evelyn's chest tightened. A cold, gnawing realization settled in. The megacity wasn't just architecture. It was a mind, a consciousness, ancient and vast, aware of their intrusion. The crew's morale fractured. Kendra refused to leave the temporary base. Malik argued with Evelyn, insisting they ascend and seal the levels. Evelyn found herself torn between scientific duty and growing terror. Each corridor they explored seemed alive. Each symbol pulsated faintly, guiding her deeper. By the 6th day, the city began to change before their eyes. The bioluminescent panels flickered in rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. Doors that had been solid and sealed now opened slowly as they approached, revealing spaces that shouldn't exist, staircases leading to nowhere, plazas that bent perspective, streets folding over themselves. And then they found it, a monolithic doorway, larger than anything above. Its surface was smooth, black, and reflective, but when Evelyn looked closely, it wasn't just a reflection. It showed them inside, moving differently, their expressions twisted, their eyes wide with unspoken fear. The whispering came again, directly into her mind. "Come on, remember?" Evelyn staggered back. Her pulse raced. She realized with horror that the city knew her, knew each of them. Every thought, every fear, every doubt was catalogued, mirrored, manipulated. It had been waiting for them, shaping the corridors, guiding them deeper, choosing whom it would claim first. And in that instant, she understood. This was no longer exploration. They were no longer visitors. They were intruders in a consciousness older than memory, a mind that used space and time as tools to entrap them. Evelyn's hand shook as she turned to the others, whose faces mirrored her own growing panic. They were trapped in a city that remembered too much, a city that would not let them leave unscathed. The disturbance was complete, and the city, patient and alive, was watching. Chapter 2 sets the stage for the full horror to manifest in Chapter 3. The city's consciousness becomes undeniable, crew members disappear, and Evelyn's obsession and fear collide. The psychological horror deepens, blurring reality, memory, and the city's malevolent awareness. Evelyn descended alone. She told herself it was to find Tomas. In truth, it was obsession. Every instinct screamed danger, but the pull of the city, of its whispered calls, of the impossibly perfect streets below, was irresistible. She had seen the reflections in the monolithic doorway, the distortions, the endless corridors folding in on themselves. And she knew. The city had remembered her, and it would not let her leave until she understood its purpose. Malik tried to stop her. "Doctor, you can't. This isn't just a ruin. It's a mind, a trap. If you go any further—" "I have to," she snapped, her voice taut with frustration and fear. "Tomas is down there. He's part of this, and I need to see it. I need to see it with my own eyes." Reluctantly, Malik let her go, watching as she disappeared into the spiraling staircases of level 5. The air grew warmer as she descended. Light panels pulsed softly beneath her feet, creating an uneven rhythm that matched her heartbeat. The corridors twisted impossibly. A street that led to a plaza suddenly curled upward, then downward, defying Euclidean logic. Evelyn's mind ached with the strain of it, yet she pressed on, drawn toward the monolithic structures she had glimpsed before, the black reflective walls that seemed to watch her every step. At the center of the atrium stood a pedestal, atop which sat a perfectly clear crystalline sphere. It shimmered with a subtle inner light, reflecting shapes that weren't fully there. Silhouettes of people frozen mid-motion, limbs slightly elongated, faces distorted. Among them, she recognized Tomas, eyes wide, frozen in terror. The low hum of the city's heartbeat filled her ears. Then the whispers began, multiple voices, layered and overlapping, speaking directly inside her skull. "We built forever, and forever built us." Evelyn staggered back, clutching her head. She realized with dread that the voices weren't separate. They were hers, interwoven with the city's memory. Every thought she'd had since arriving, every fear, every hope, had been absorbed, catalogued, and echoed back to her in distorted harmony. The monoliths around her shifted, or perhaps her perception shifted. Their reflective surfaces showed dozens of Evelyns, each slightly different, some screaming silently, others smiling with terrible calm. She wanted to run, but the floor seemed to pulse beneath her feet, bending space in ways her mind could barely comprehend. "Stop, stop," she cried. But the city ignored her. A single figure stepped from the shadows, Tomas, or what had become of him. His face was familiar, yet impossible. His movements were jerky, unnaturally smooth at the same time, as if he were both puppet and puppeteer. "Evelyn," his voice was her own. "You were always part of this." "Always." She recoiled. "What did you do to him?" "We preserved them. We preserved you." The sphere pulsed brighter, and Evelyn felt herself pulled toward it. Images flooded her mind, cities rising and falling, humans burying themselves under layers of stone and memory, civilizations attempting to outgrow their own awareness. She saw herself from multiple perspectives, a curious archaeologist, an intruder, a participant in something vast and terrible. Her reflection fractured across the monoliths, dozens of her staring back. One smiled, one screamed, one turned and walked toward the crystal, beckoning. "Join us, remember, belong." Her thoughts were no longer fully her own. The city had invaded, folding her mind into its architecture. Panic surged, but clarity struck. She could resist, or she could succumb. Either way, the decision was irreversible. She lunged for the sphere. Touching it, she felt not glass but flesh, warm and pliant, and her consciousness shivered as she glimpsed through the city's eyes. A mind spanning centuries, collecting, preserving, and remembering all who had entered. Tomas' body collapsed into the sphere, absorbed entirely. Malik's voice echoed from above, distant but sharp. "Evelyn, get out. Now." Her body hesitated. Part of her wanted to escape, to flee the suffocating presence that had consumed the lower sectors. Another part, drawn by fascination and obsession, wanted to merge, to understand the city, to become immortal in its memory. The monoliths pulsed. Faces in the reflections whispered, coaxed, demanded. Evelyn felt herself splitting, a fragment trying to flee, a fragment merging with the crystalline consciousness. She realized she was the city now, and yet not. Time and space became meaningless. Finally, she made a choice. With a scream that was hers, but also countless others, she pulled away, leaving a fragment of herself in the sphere. Tomas' face blinked in relief, or was it terror? She couldn't tell. She ran. Stairs twisted beneath her, hallways elongating and folding, yet somehow she reached the upper levels. She emerged in a corridor alone. Malik rushed to her side, support and relief in his eyes. But she knew it wasn't over. The city had her, a part of her consciousness folded into its architecture, and it would always remember. The whispers had stopped for now. She stared back at the sealed lower levels, at the monoliths and the crystal sphere glowing faintly through reinforced walls. The city had won and lost simultaneously. It had claimed part of her, but she had survived. Yet survival came at the cost of sanity, memory, and perhaps, in some subtle way, her soul. And as she glanced at the walls around her, she knew the city was patient. It would wait. It would call again. And one day, it would finish what it had started. Chapter 3 Summary. Horror fully reveals itself. The city is a sentient, malevolent consciousness. Crew member Tomas is absorbed into the city. Evelyn faces a terrible choice. merge with the city or survive, but lose part of herself. Psychological tension dominates. Reality, memory, and space distort. Climactic encounter sets up Chapter 4's haunting aftermath. When the rescue team arrived 3 weeks later, the upper levels of Sector 9 were eerily silent. Dust had settled over abandoned gear, footprints frozen in time, as though no one had walked there for decades. The city itself seemed unchanged, perfectly preserved, untouched, indifferent. Malik emerged first, hollow-eyed, thin, and unsteady. He had survived, but not unscathed. His hands trembled as he recounted what had happened below, his voice fractured and hesitant. It watches. It listens. It remembers everything. We weren't just exploring, we were being cataloged. The official debrief files later labeled his account as psychogenic delirium induced by isolation, the kind of stress-induced breakdowns common in extreme underground exploration. Yet the rescue team couldn't deny the evidence. Areas of the lower levels had collapsed unnaturally, twisted staircases and impossible corridors defying engineering logic. Dr. Evelyn Marlowe's body was never found. There were no signs of trauma, no hint of violence, only her equipment, scattered in the twisting corridors she had traversed. The crystalline sphere and monoliths she had touched were gone, vanished as if the city had swallowed them. Months later, the contractor received a transmission from deep beneath Sector 9, a faint, intermittent video feed tagged with Evelyn's ID. The footage showed a dim corridor stretching endlessly. Walls bent unnaturally. Doors appeared and disappeared as the camera moved. At the end of the tunnel, a figure stood perfectly still. Evelyn. Her eyes were open, unblinking, her expression calm and unreadable. Her lips moved soundlessly. Even when the video captured her, the feed looped in impossible ways, corridors folding into themselves, reflections in glass panels showing multiple versions of her, all slightly out of sync. Analysts who reviewed the footage reported strange symptoms. Vivid dreams of cities they had never seen, labyrinthine streets echoing in their minds, whispers and languages they did not know. Some swore they heard their own names in the static of old radios. The city, it seemed, had extended its memory beyond itself. It remembered Evelyn, it remembered Tomas, it remembered everyone who had entered, and perhaps, in some way, it had remembered the analysts as well. Malik never returned to excavation. He left academia entirely, haunted by fragments of his experience. Shadows seemed to linger at the edges of his vision, hallways in his dreams folding impossibly, whispers scratching at his thoughts. He spoke little of what he had witnessed, but occasionally muttered phrases from the city. Join us, remember, belong. The contractor reburied Sector 9, sealing entrances, covering elevator shafts, and classifying all records. They labeled it lost subterranean infrastructure, citing safety and contamination concerns. Yet the whispers persisted, faint and nearly imperceptible in the static of old communication systems, in the hum of ventilation shafts beneath the surface. And in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of the city, Evelyn walked still. She existed both within and without, a fragment of herself merged with the consciousness of the forgotten megacity. In her mind, streets stretched infinitely, folding and twisting, alive with memory and thought. She could see the countless souls the city had preserved over centuries, humanity catalogued, frozen, and remembered. The final lesson was bitter and unforgettable. The city was not merely a place, nor a ruin. It was a memory incarnate, a mind that outlasted its makers. And curiosity, the very trait that had driven Evelyn to explore, could bind a human consciousness to something ancient, indifferent, and eternal. Visitors, she understood, were never truly leaving. They became part of the city's memory, fragments of thought and perception catalogued alongside those who came before. Survival was possible, but at the cost of understanding too much, knowing the city's mind, and carrying a part of it within oneself forever. The closing image lingered in the minds of those who later heard whispers about Sector 9, a glass corridor bending into infinity, a crystalline sphere that pulsed with captured lives, and a single figure, Evelyn Marlowe, walking endlessly, calm and silent, a fragment of a human mind now inseparably entwined with the city itself. The city's hum persisted beneath the surface of the earth. Some nights, people above ground swore They heard faint breathing from beneath concrete and sand, a rhythm so subtle it could be mistaken for the wind. And if one listened long enough, they could swear the faintest whisper reached up from the depths. Remember us. A warning, a promise, and a lingering echo of curiosity's price. The world had lost Evelyn Marlowe, but the city had not, and it would remember forever